Putin's remarks suggest Russia has no intention of making territorial concessions. U.S. Department of State shares details of meeting with Russians in Turkey and more than 10 leaders invited to Ukraine summit in UK, peace and security to be discussed. The latest news next. The U.S. Department of State has announced that Moscow and Washington have outlined specific initial steps to stabilize the operations of their diplomatic missions following talks between the two nations in Istanbul, Turkey. U.S. Department of State in a statement, as reported by European Pravda. Details: the State Department noted that the Istanbul meeting had focused on the operations of the United States and Russian diplomatic missions. The U.S. delegation was headed by Senator Coulter, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Russia and Central Europe, while the Russian delegation was led by Alexander Darchev, Director of the North Atlantic Department of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Russia's ambassador designate for the United States.
The United States raised concerns regarding access to banking and contracted services, as well as the need to ensure stable and sustainable staffing levels at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. Through constructive discussions, both sides identified concrete initial steps to stabilize bilateral mission operations in these areas.
Coulter and Darchev agreed to hold another meeting on this matter soon, with the date, location and participant details to be decided later. The Institute for the Study of War has reported that remarks by Russian ruler, dictator, terrorist Vladimir Putin and Kremlin officials signaled that Russia retains maximalist territorial ambitions and is unwilling to offer territorial concessions. Reported by ISW. About details, analysts observed that terrorist Putin and Russian officials persist in rejecting the negotiation terms put forward by the United States and insist that Ukraine cede territories Russia has failed to occupy. In an address to the board of the Federal Security Service on the 27th of February, Putin said that Russia would continue to intensify FSB operations in Donbas and so-called Novorossiya. On the 27th of February, Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov similarly claimed that Donbas and Novorossiya were an integral part of Russia. The ISW points out that Putin and other Russian officials have previously described Novorossiya as encompassing all of eastern and southern Ukraine, including Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa and Mykolaiv regions. However, the exact boundaries of this concept remain a point of contention, even among Russian ultranationalists. Putin has previously demanded that Ukraine cede Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia regions, despite Russian forces failing to occupy substantial portions of them. Putin and other Russian officials have consistently signaled that their ambitions extend beyond the administrative borders of the 4 illegally occupied regions, aiming for further territorial conquest.
Renewed official Russian statements that the invented region of Novorossiya is part of Russia indicate that Putin maintains his maximalist territorial ambitions and is unwilling to offer territorial concessions.
The ISW stressed that Russian troops have seized a small portion of Kharkiv region and the Kinburn Spit in Mykolaiv region and were attempting to push towards the border with Dnipropetrovsk region. The Kremlin could exploit its limited occupation of these areas as a false justification to pressure Ukraine into ceding more territory.
ISW continues to assess that Putin remains uninterested in good faith negotiations that require compromises and thinks that he can achieve his war objectives militarily in the medium to long term.
Analysts noted that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated on the 26th of February that if Russia is making maximalist demands that it knows cannot be met, the United States will recognize that Putin is not serious about pursuing negotiations. U.S. President Donald Trump reiterated on the 26th of February that Russia would have to make concessions in peace talks and repeated on the 27th of February that the United States would suddenly try to get as much land as it can beg for Ukraine.
Kremlin guidelines to Russian state media about coverage of recent US-Russian meetings indicate Russian President Vladimir Putin's determination to manipulate US President Donald Trump and divide the West.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has invited more than 10 European leaders to a summit on Ukraine and security to be held on the 2nd of March, reported by European Pravda citing AFP.
The Prime Minister will use the summit to drive forward European action on Ukraine, signaling our collective unwavering support to securing a just and enduring peace and a lasting deal that ensures Ukraine's future sovereignty and security.
About details, leaders from across continental Europe, including France, Germany, Denmark and Italy, as well as Turkey, NATO and the European Union, have been invited to the summit. Starmer has also invited the leaders of Netherlands, Norway, Poland, Spain, Finland, Sweden and Romania to the summit following his talks with President Trump on the 27th of February at the White House. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, European President Ursula von der Leyen and President of the European Council Antonio Costa are also expected to attend. Prior to the main summit, Starmer will reportedly hold a morning phone call with the Baltic states and then meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at Downing Street to discuss the war unleashed by Russia. Before the summit, Starmer is also scheduled to host one-on-one talks with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni at Downing Street. The UK Prime Minister's office said that meeting would build on talks held in Paris and hosted by French President Emmanuel Macron earlier this month and would concentrate on strengthening Ukraine's position now, including ongoing military support and increased economic pressure on Russia. The meeting will also reiterate the need for a strong, lasting deal that delivers a permanent peace and discuss next steps on planning for strong security guarantees. Starmer will also insist that Ukraine must be part of any negotiations to end the 3-year full-scale war unleashed by Russia and will also acknowledge the need for Europe to play its part on defense and step up for the good of their collective security. Europe needs to rediscover its taste for risk, ambition and power in the face of the unpredictability of the United States under Donald Trump. Europe needs to be more independent both on Ukraine and on customs duties, according to French President Emmanuel Macron. During a 2-day state visit to Portugal, Emmanuel Macron called on Europeans to be more united and stronger than ever and to abandon their happy vassalage to the United States. According to a statement from the Élysée Palace, this official trip to the country, the first by a French head of state in more than a quarter of a century, was intended to celebrate the depth and closeness of ties between the two countries. However, Macron used the opportunity to deliver a message to Europeans, urging them to rediscover their taste to risk, ambition and power in the face of the unpredictability of the United States under Donald Trump, both on Ukraine and tariffs. He said, quote, "I see many people in our Europe saying, we will have to be nice to the Americans. This will pass. We will have to bend our backs." Macron says the answer is not submission and does not advocate happy vassal dependence on the United States.
Europeans can be convinced of one thing: they need to be united and strong more than ever. And for this, we must make very deep choices in technological, industrial, and defense matters.
Macron visited the United States this week and met with Trump. After his trip, he held a briefing for European leaders. The French president said that after his discussions with President Trump in Washington and preparation for the European Council on March 6th, they had reaffirmed their commitment to work together to create conditions for a lasting and secure peace in Ukraine and the security of Europe. That's all for today. Thanks for watching this video. Like